The start of a new year brings a chance to reset, to look ahead with hope. And today, we're in Ripton, Vermont, gaining a lesson in hope from the unlikeliest of sources.
Have you always thought of yourself as a hopeful person?
I don't know if I think of myself as a hopeful person now.
That's author and environmental activist Bill McKibbin. For almost 40 years, Bill has been sounding the alarm about our changing climate. But in his new book, Here Comes the Sun, at last he sees something different, a turning point. An emerging moment in solar-powered possibility that could lead us not just out of the climate crisis, but into, in his words, a new world. As the snow fell softly outside, we sat down in Ripton's historic community house to talk about a path forward that begins by simply looking up.
For me, my favorite season of the year has always been winter. For me, winter is the most magical season because for a little while, friction gives up its grip on the planet and you get to glide across the surface. That's one of the reasons I think that climate change early on struck me so hard, the understanding that winter was an endangered time all of a sudden.
What first made you care about the natural world? Was there a moment or a place that set you on this path? Because you care a lot about nature.
Yes. I've always loved being out in the natural world, and my father was a great hiker and things. But when I was a young man, I wrote a long piece for the New Yorker magazine. I was 22 or 23. And it was about where everything in my apartment in New York came from. I followed down to Brazil to see where Con Ed was getting its oil. And by the end of it, I had a stronger sense than I'd previously had, being a good child of the suburbs, about just how physical the world really is. That even a place as rich as New York depends on the steady operation of the planet's physical systems. And I think that set me up well for reading the early science in the 1980s around climate change and understanding, in a way I might not have otherwise, that this was going to be a truly difficult problem. So I ended up writing the first book about what we then called the greenhouse effect. And pretty much my life since has been spent in many ways wrestling with this biggest of crises.
So what was it like writing about the climate crisis in those early years when we knew it was coming, but we hadn't really found the solutions yet, we didn't know where we were going, and all you can do is talk about the problem? Yep. How did that feel?
It felt like when you have a dream and there's a monster coming, but you can't get anybody else to see the monster when it's coming. It felt very strange, And for a number of years, there really were very few other people writing about it, working on things. That changed over time, and more people became, which was helpful to me psychologically, if nothing else. It's been a curious thing because humans did have warning that this was coming. The scientific instruments and things happened to have been invented in time to give us this warning, and then no one paid any attention to the warning.
Was there a moment where you started to feel like some of the solutions were starting to materialize?
Since the problem with climate change is burning coal and gas and oil, we've always known that the solution waited on something that would substitute for coal and gas and oil. And it was pretty clear that the only real possibilities were the sun and the wind, but those were expensive, and so it was hard to do this. That's why the moment we're suddenly in now is so interesting. About 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce power from the sun and the wind than from burning things.
Global innovation in solar and wind technology have improved the efficiency and lowered the cost of every aspect of these complementary systems, so that now, utility-scale installations feeding clean electricity directly into the grid are cheaper to build, run, fix, and maintain than fossil fuel systems. In 2023, globally, we began putting up a gigawatt's worth, providing energy equivalent to the output of a coal or nuclear plant every day. By 2024, That was happening every 18 hours.
It's the last 36 months that has seen this sudden explosion of clean energy. Suddenly these things were not alternative energy, which is what we've been calling them my whole life. Suddenly they were the obvious, common sense, straightforward way to do this, which is why 95% of new electric generation around the world last year was from the sun and the wind. And I didn't think people yet knew that this was going on. I think I was right when the book was excerpted in the New Yorker last summer. The reaction I kept getting from people, even people who spend a lot of their life working on energy and climate, was basically, I had no idea. I think that we'd called it alternative energy for so long that it had just sunk into that corner of our brain, like this was always going to be a marginal thing, and then suddenly it wasn't. And people needed to hear that.
Why are we stuck in this old paradigm?
Well, it takes a while to get things out of your head, and there's been an expensive and long-running disinformation campaign from the fossil fuel industry, one part of which has been aimed at making people think that this isn't real. This is elegant technology, the highest, best functioning, newest stuff in the world. But if you have an unlimited budget with which to try and disparage it, it may take a while for... The good news is that's not happening in the rest of the world.
Yeah. What is happening in the rest of the world?
The rest of the world, people are quickly rising to this challenge. Countries are rapidly starting to buy some solar panels, usually from China, and then they don't depend on China or the US or Saudi Arabia or Russia, then they just depend on the sun, which comes up every day. They depend on the wind, which, the wind is just another form of solar energy. The sun heats the earth differentially, producing the wind that turns those majestic turbines.
Some of the examples I loved from the book, the solar panels on the balconies in Germany, that was great.
Yeah, so after the invasion of Ukraine, people wanted off Russian natural gas. One of the ways they've done it in cities across Europe over the last 3 years is this thing we're calling balcony solar. You just go to Best Buy, get a, whatever they call Best Buy in Italy, and get a panel for a few €100, and it has a standard plug on the back that you just stick in the wall. You don't need an electrician. It can produce 20-25% of the power that an apartment uses often. So not everything, but not nothing either. There's millions of these across Europe now. Those are illegal everywhere in the US, except the state of Utah, where the very Republican state legislature passed the enabling legislation in March by unanimous vote in both houses of the legislature. The Republican senator who sponsored it said, if this is good enough for the people of Stuttgart, why should it be denied the people of Salt Lake City? Australia has so much solar power that the government has decreed that all Australians will get 3 free hours of electricity every afternoon. You can schedule your washing machine and your dishwasher. You can charge your EV. If you have a fairly inexpensive storage battery, you can fill it up for free and run your house all night. Humans have spent 700,000 years working hard to get enough energy. You had to go out and collect firewood, or you had to pay for your electric bill or whatever. Now, thanks to the sun, it's free if your leaders had the foresight to go do that work.
People look at the costs right now of, say, installation or of buying an electric vehicle, et cetera. I mean, those costs are real too.
The fact that those costs are real is why the Biden administration had this Inflation Reduction Act that was to provide the money to help people with the upfront costs. And that was the first thing that the GOP Congress got rid of, because the oil industry told them to, because they understand that this is their competition,
So what happens if we don't make the change?
China is clearly decided that this is the future. And we're just handing that future to them, which as Americans should make us somewhat upset. All this stuff was invented here. I mean, the first solar cell in 1954, Bell Labs, Edison, New Jersey.
This toy Ferris wheel is getting its power from a new battery developed by the Bell Telephone Laboratories, a battery which translates light into practical energy. The battery is powerful enough to operate a small radio transmitter. No moving parts in the battery, and it can't wear out. Something new under the sun, indeed.
The first industrial wind turbine, 1943, Grandpa's Knob, 30 miles south of here in the Taconics in Vermont. You know, we could have been the ones who owned the future, and instead, the fossil fuel industry is making us try instead to squeeze the last few dollars and few drops out of 18th century technology. It's a terrible, terrible thing for our kids and grandkids. It's as if we're just trying to run the country in reverse. And if we keep at it, 15 years from now, America will be the colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion. And tourists, if we give them visas still, will arrive here to gawk at how people used to live back when they had to set things on fire to make their way. If we don't make the change as a planet, then we melt. We've already raised the temperature almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like that much, except if you think about it, if your temperature is supposed to be 96.8 or whatever, and you raise it 3 degrees, I mean, you'd notice if you were running a fever of 100 degrees every day your whole life. We can't have civilizations like the ones we're used to. There's just too much violent chaos and flux. The UN estimates that at least somewhere between 1 and 3 billion people would have to leave their homes. That's one human being in 4. Think about the chaos politically that's caused to have 1 million refugees at our southern border. Multiply that by 1,000 and try to imagine how screwed up our politics and everything will be. That's before you start figuring out how you're going to grow food or whatever else. That's the bad case. The good case is not that we stop global warming. Too late for that, but we can shave considerable amount off how hot it eventually gets. And then we're left with a planet that now gets to depend on the sun and the wind, which are available everywhere.
What would an electrified world running on solar and wind power look like?
It would look much fairer than the one we inhabit now. 80% of the world lives in countries that have to import fossil fuels. So think for a minute about what the geopolitics of the world would have been like over the last century if oil had been of trivial value during that time. Think of the number of wars and coups and assassination attempts and terrorist plots and stuff we could have avoided. Humans are good at fighting wars, but they'll be hard-pressed to figure out how to fight one over sunshine, you know? And that's a beautiful thought for our kids and grandkids.
How do we start this change at home? Bill is a big proponent of think globally, act locally. So I asked him how he would evaluate Vermont's efforts to go green.
Sometimes we need a slightly different aesthetic, you know? Our Public Service Commission has turned down solar farms in this state entirely on aesthetic grounds. They just said people don't want to look at them. That's not okay at this point in our history. We're in an emergency. In this state, we essentially put a de facto moratorium on wind power years ago because a certain number of people didn't want to look at it. Most of the challenges in Vermont and the Adirondacks have been around these questions of aesthetics. And there are times when I think the Vermont state motto should be, change anything you want once I'm dead, you know. So I get why people say, I don't want to look at a windmill on the ridgeline and it's going to take some acres of land and so on and so forth. Those things are true. But the much deeper challenge to Vermont is going to be when there's no winter left at all. We need and we can develop a new aesthetic. I find talking to young Vermonters that they love the idea of producing energy here. And I think that other people are starting to come around. I hope so.
Bill's hope for the future might come from his experiences living in Ripton, a town of about 700 souls on the edge of the breadloaf wilderness, the biggest wilderness in the state. He moved here from the Adirondacks in 2001.
What has living here taught you? Like, how has living in a place like this changed your worldview or impacted it?
I mean, I think that for Americans, you know, the curse of America probably is a kind of hyper-individualism. We're taught to focus on ourselves at all times. You really can't, I mean, in a community like this, you can't do that. People have to look out for each other to one degree or another. And so I love the sense of community here.
Mm-hmm. And did living in Vermont make it easier to keep fighting for the climate on a global platform? Because you travel a lot.
I'm very glad to have Vermont to come back to always from constant work around the world. Vermont is special in many ways. Its sense of community is deep, and that breeds a kind of world-class level of social trust. As the academics measure it, people trust their neighbors.
Trust, of course, is earned through action. In a pause between snowfalls, Bill and I decided to take a walk to the Ripton Country Store down the street, because he wanted me to understand the connection he sees between local action, community, and protecting a future we care about. In 2018, when its owners were ready to retire, Bill helped the store make national headlines.
People were worried that they wouldn't be able to find
A buyer?
a buyer.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, it's not exactly like Walmart, you know. So
It's
yes,
specialized, it takes a specialized person.
we were very worried.
Uh-huh.
And so yes, one of the things I did was write a kind of
It's like a personal ad.
yeah, almost like a personal ad for, and put it in the Times,
Mm-hmm.
in the op-ed, just explaining how absolutely central, you could move up here and take over this store and be absolutely central to the community and how it works.
Yep.
You know?
Hi.
This is absolutely the center of life in Ripton. Thanks to Eva and to Gary, it really is the living heart of Ripton. Without the store, we wouldn't have a town. And what it represents is a working local economy. One of the things that happens in Vermont is that more and more we send our money away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, here we send our money, you know, maybe down the hill to Hannaford's or whatever, or off to Walmart. But I mean, as a state, we send, just in terms of energy, buying fossil fuel, we spend about $2 billion a year off to Texas and Saudi Arabia, you know, when we could be producing our energy close to home. We've sort of started to figure that out with food, and there's been this local food movement and farmers markets, and you know, here at the store, the local growers produce lots of good produce in the summer, and most days there's some good local apple cider donuts.
Yeah.
Up here. You know, Vermont's capable of producing a lot, but we have to pay attention to it. It drives me nuts when people in Ripton drive by here and go down to shop at, you know, in town, or go to Burlington or whatever, because if we didn't have the store, we wouldn't have, you know, so much that really matters about the town.
Well, help me connect the dots between this campaign, this love of place, you know, like working to keep the general store alive in small towns in Vermont, and the ideas you're talking about in Here Comes the Sun.
So Vermont doesn't have oil and gas and coal. Thank God it doesn't, you know. I mean, the worst thing that can happen to a place is to have something valuable under the soil and dug up. But we do have sun and wind, plenty of them, and they're all we need to run the energy needs of this state. I mean, think about, you know, we think that we're like frugal Yankees, you know, in the Vermont tradition, and what we're doing is wasting immense amounts of sun and wind every single day. I mean, if Vermont had $2 billion extra a year in its local economy instead of shipping it off to Texas, think about, I mean, that's, you know, that's a serious sum of money. If a town has a set of wind turbines or a solar farm on it, that's one of the things that provides an actual tax base. We don't have a lot of manufacturing and industrial tax base in Vermont, and we're unlikely ever to really have that much. This is a big part of what we could be doing. The flows of money one way out of the state are a huge problem. If the thing that we like about Vermont is the character of the place, it doesn't happen by itself, you know. You don't. If everybody in Vermont bought everything from Amazon, then we would not have general stores. If everybody in Vermont buys all their energy from Exxon at a great distance, then we're just never going to have that money that would otherwise be supporting things happening here. And the same is true for people in every other place in the world too. I mean, there's only a few places on Earth that have lots of fossil fuel. At the moment, they're collecting everybody's money. It's the greatest casino ever, you know, for their point of view. But the rest of us are the suckers.
If change is necessary, even critical, but the game is rigged in favor of powerful, entrenched interests, the obvious question is, what can be done by ordinary people?
So at some point, about 20 years ago, it really began to dawn on me that we would need to build some power of our own. If you don't have billions of dollars, the only way to do that is to build movements of people. You know, I had no idea how to do that, but with friends, mostly kids down at the college, that's what we started doing. The very first thing we did was a march up the west side of Vermont in the summer of 2006. And for 5 days we walked up, you know, sort of paralleling Route 7 up to Burlington. And by the time we got to Burlington, there were 1,000 people marching, which, you know, for Vermont's a pretty good crowd. But what was really scary was to read in the Free Press the next morning a story saying this was probably the biggest demonstration about climate change that had yet happened in the whole US. And when we read that, I was like, well, no wonder we're losing. We have all the things we'd need for a movement. We've got the science and the policy people. We've got Al Gore. The only part of the movement we forgot was the movement part, you know? And so then we started building 350.org, which became the first big global grassroots climate campaign. We've organized about 20,000 rallies in every country on Earth except North Korea. You know, and now that I'm older, we've organized Third Act, which collects together people over the age of 60 for action on climate and democracy.
A lot of older folks feel like their action years are behind them. They've already fought the good fights. What do you say to someone who feels tired or like they've already done their part?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and there's times when I feel a little bit that way myself. I've spent most of my life organizing with young people, and young people have done most of the good work around most of these issues, as young people often do. But they did such a good job, especially at the sort of moment of people like Greta Thunberg and things, that I heard too many people my age saying, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve this problem, which is probably not very moral and definitely not very practical. Young people have great intelligence, energy, and idealism, and they lack sufficient structural power by themselves to make change on this scale in the time that we have. If you've reached the age where you have hair coming out your ears, then you have structural power coming out your ears too. You know, there are 70 million Americans over the age of 60. We punch above our weight politically because we all vote. There's no known way to stop old people from voting. We have lots of connections and skills. So that's what we decided 3 years ago to try and see if we could rally people, focused on climate and democracy. And now we have about 110,000 across the country, a wonderful chapter here in Vermont, at Third Act, and they're doing fantastic work around energy. We're doing work on this simplifying solar power everywhere, making it easier to put it up and so on. We can play a really significant role, and if we do, it'll make it easier for young people many of whom really are suffering from this climate despair and climate anxiety, I think it's less because they're just afraid of what's happening physically on the planet, and more out of a sense that they've just been kind of abandoned to deal with it by themselves. I mean, I really think it would be a great sin to waste this new opportunity now, because I don't think we're going to get another one like it.
Mm-hmm. Last question. For someone watching who thinks, I am just one person, what can I really do? What is the first step you suggest they take?
The most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to change some of our political and economic ground rules. There's some really quite beautiful things that we could be doing here. This is a new possibility. And it takes a while for that to sink in. Humans have been setting things on fire for 700,000 years. All of a sudden, we don't really have to do that anymore. We have the wit to make full use of this large ball of burning gas that the good Lord was kind enough to hang 93 million miles up in the sky. So we could have a very new relationship with the world around us.
In his third act, it's Bill's mission to create community, locally, across the state, the nation, and the world, to empower us all to harness the sun and own the future. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.